our brothers from other schools of thought, one of the top misconceptions that they carry today is that these Shia, these followers of Ahlelbayt, they believe that the Quran has been distorted. It has been changed. Now, the distortion of the Quran in Arabic is called tahrif al-Quran. Whether the Quran is distorted or not. And this is a very important discussion that requires our examination and analysis. Has the book of God, the Holy Quran, been tampered with throughout history? Or the current Quran that we have is the same exact Quran that was revealed on the Holy Prophet ﷺ. Now, before we examine this issue, there are 4 types of tahrif, 4 types of distortions. The first type of distortion is to distort the meaning of a verse. You don't change the verse literally. The verse stays. You don't add anything to it. You don't delete anything to it. But you change the meaning and the interpretation and the tafsir of it. The Prophet ﷺ brings a tafsir, and then people come after him and they give their own opinion. That's one type of tahrif of Quran. It's not a literal distortion, it's a metaphoric distortion. This is one type. The second type of tahrif al-Quran that we have is to change the sequence of verses and chapters. We're not adding anything or subtracting anything from the Quran. But is there a change to the sequence of some verses and chapters? If there is a change, that is one type of tahrif. Because it's not the same exact sequence that the Prophet ﷺ gave to humanity. That's the second type. The third type of tahrif is to add something to the Quran. To add phrases, to insert words. And then we have the fourth type, which is to omit entire chapters from the Quran, verses or phrases. These are the 4 primary possible types of tahrif. Now you will find that throughout history, the vast majority of Muslims have believed that no distortion has been made to the Quran. The Quran has been kept intact, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised in the Quran that He will preserve and protect this book. Yes, does that mean that there are no scholars in history who have disputed this and they have stated, yes, there are some omissions that have been done to the Quran? There is. But are these scholars the majority? No, they are a minority of scholars, number one. Number two, are they Shia or Sunni? Both. In fact, there are more Sunni scholars in history who have claimed that certain verses were deleted from the Quran than Shia scholars. A very minority of Shia scholars have stated that in history. Nothing has been added to the Quran, but possibly some verses went missing. But there are more Sunni scholars who have said that in history than Shia scholars. And this is very important to make this distinction, because the way that this discussion is being framed today is that this is a Shi'i problem. It's the Shia who believe in the distortion of the Quran. Way before any Shia scholar said that, Sunni scholars have mentioned it in their own books, and we'll give you some examples from Bukhari and Muslim. So this is not a Shi'i problem. It's a Muslim discussion. It's a Muslim problem that has to be addressed. And a minority of scholars have made this statement. Otherwise, the very vast majority of scholars have believed that the Quran has not undergone any changes after the Holy Prophet ﷺ. There is one hadith that we have, which some people use this hadith to state, see, you Shias, you believe in the distortion of the Quran. Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, after the Prophet ﷺ passed away, once he walked into the masjid of the Prophet, into the mosque, and he was carrying his personal copy of the Quran, because the Imam alayhi salam would write the verses when he would hear them from the Prophet ﷺ. He brought forth his book, his own copy of the Quran. Those companions who seized power, they opened his book, they looked at the Quran, they read a few pages, they told him, take it back. We don't want this copy of the Quran. Keep this for you. We're not interested in it. What does this mean? Many people use this hadith to say, see, Imam Ali alayhi salam, according to your hadiths, had a different Quran. And they did not accept the different Quran that he had. That's not the meaning of it. Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, when he would write the verses in the Quran, he would also write the tafsir of the verses. He would put a commentary and footnotes. Every verse that was revealed, the Imam alayhi salam would write. When was it revealed? Why was it revealed? What's the meaning of it? How did the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam explain it? So he would, in his own personal copy, he would have these footnotes. Well, these companions, they looked at some of these footnotes. It didn't suit them well. They did not like that tafsir because they had a political agenda. And some of the tafsir that the Imam had in his copy was not compatible with what they were doing with power. So that's why they rejected it. And Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam complains from this type of tahrif. He says, "Oh Allah, I complain to you from those people who distorted the meanings of your book." So if we talk about this type of tahrif al-Quran, then yes, until today it keeps happening. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has preserved the actual words of the Quran. This is one type of tahrif that is discussed. The second type of tahrif is the sequence of the Quran. When you look at the sequence of the verses and the chapters in the Holy Quran, is this the exact same sequence that was revealed on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Was it determined by him as instructed by God? Or the companions later decided to come up with the sequence that we see today? If you ask Ahl Sunnah from their scholars, many of them believe that the companions decided. When the Prophet left, the Quran was not in full book form with a determined sequence. After him, the companions got together and they arranged the Quran according to the sequence that we see today. What is our perspective on that? We believe that the current Quran, as we see it today, is the same exact sequence that was revealed on the Prophet ﷺ. Now there are some who will argue, but during the Prophet's life, the Quran was just spoken. It wasn't in book form. That's not the case. We have historical accounts and references that demonstrate even during his lifetime, the Prophet had a copy of the Quran in his masjid. Yes, a lot of the Quran would be written on scattered pieces of paper. Each companion, he hears a few verses, he writes some of those verses. But the Quran was completed in book form towards the end of the Prophet's life. There was actually a book that you could refer to. For example, there's one hadith from Ibn Abbas in which he states, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed verse 281 of Surah Al-Baqarah, Jibreel, the angel, tells the Prophet, put this verse after the verse 280. Well, if you didn't have a book form, where is Jibreel telling the Prophet to put it? Just abstractly in your mind? Assign these numbers to the verses? It's very clear from accounts like these that there was a book. And Jibreel is telling the Prophet, put verse 281 in this specific place, after verse 280. Another hadith that Ahmad ibn Hanbal narrates from Uthman ibn Abi al-As, one of the companions of the Prophet. He says, once I was sitting with the Messenger of God, and suddenly I saw his eyes, his vision changing. So we realized that he was receiving revelation. What did he receive in that instance? This companion says Jibreel came to the Prophet and he revealed to him verse 90 of Surah An-Nahl. إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُ بِالْعَدْلِ وَالْإِحْسَانِ وَإِيتَاءِ ذِي الْقُرْبَى. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands you to do justice and to be good with people. God reveals this verse, verse 90 of Surah An-Nahl. This companion says Jibreel tells the Prophet to assign this verse in this particular place of Surah An-Nahl, verse 90. Well, if there was no physical book, where was the Prophet assigning these, numbers? Just abstractly in his mind, he's saying, okay, this verse is number 90. It was obvious the Prophet ﷺ made it known to his companions, put this verse here. So there was an actual book. Now, if there was an actual book, it had a sequence. One chapter would come before the other chapter. This in itself is proof that during the Prophet's life, there was a sequence. And the same sequence that we see today was determined by the Prophet ﷺ. This is the stance of the followers of Ahlelbayt, peace be upon them, even though scholars from other schools of thought have said otherwise. A second hint and proof that demonstrates the current sequence was determined by God, not the companions. If you analyze the current sequence in the Quran, do you find a specific pattern in the sequence of the chapters? See, if the companions gather together and create a council and they decide, okay, we have 114 chapters, let's arrange them. There should be a pattern that they follow, right? A logical, discernible, clear pattern. I ask you, what is the pattern of the chapters of the Quran? You could say one way is to arrange the Quran chronologically, right? The chapters that were revealed first come before the chapters that will revealed later. But is that the sequence of the Quran we have today? No. You have a chapter that was revealed in Medina and then another in Mecca. It doesn't follow that chronology. You have the Meccan chapters that were revealed first at the end of the Quran. Another way is to arrange the Quran according to the size of the chapter. Put the bigger chapters first and then the smaller ones. Is this the sequence of the Quran? No. You have Surah Al-Fatiha, only 7 verses. And then Surah Al-Baqarah, the longest chapter. And then you have a long chapter, a short chapter, a longer chapter, a shorter chapter. So our question is, if the companions really got together to determine this sequence, on what basis did they determine the sequence? What was their philosophy and ideology? See, there is no discernible sequence. That in itself is proof they did not put that together. Because if you get together, you will have a clear structure as to why you're arranging these verses in that manner. This in itself is proof this was arranged by Allah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He arranges the chapters, it may not be evident for me, visible for me, why in this sequence. But once you examine it deeper, it becomes clear. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has arranged these chapters based on a very delicate, concise system. And you will see scholars of tafsir explaining to us the philosophy that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose in giving us this sequence. But this is not something that the companions could have come up with. This in itself is proof that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala arranged the chapters of the Quran as we see it today. Then you are asked this question. Then what did Uthman do, the third caliph? Didn't he compile the Quran and he had the companions arrange it? No. The Quran was compiled. Imam Ali alayhi salam, for 3 days after the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, he also made sure that the Quran is fully compiled. What Uthman did is he unified the versions. You had multiple versions during the time of Uthman. Why did you have multiple versions? Remember, back then, the Arabic language was not standardized. The way you write words, sentences, each village or city may have had a different way of writing because Arabic was initially a spoken language. So it was not standardized. As a result, you find various regions writing the Quran differently. Same Quran, but the method of writing would be different. The letters and the structure. Because Arabic was not standardized yet. So what Uthman did, he unified all the versions of the Quran into one so that no one makes any distortions. But the Quran was compiled. It had a sequence. Uthman did not assign the sequence that we see it today. It was assigned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.